Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We hope you're having a great afternoon. My name is Faith Conti. My pronouns are she and hers, and I'm with Julie Kalinowski. We're customer strategy consultants. We have the fortune of working with our customers and our inner working teams to make sure that districts are meeting their goals when they're partnering with us. So we're really glad that you're joining us here today to talk about the 3 steps of accelerated learning and reimagining interventions. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you again. I'm Julie Kalinowski, like Faith said, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera for the duration of the webinar. Just a couple of housekeeping things. If you're having trouble hearing us for any reason, we do have some folks in the background that can help provide you with instructions to dial in. And also we have some people in the background able to answer questions should you have those occur during the webinar, because we have hundreds and hundreds of folks joining us from across the country, actually some from outside of the country. So welcome to those. And again, we have people there that can answer questions under the question panel. So we appreciate your time, and we will go ahead and get started. Okay, here we go. Okay, so as we started looking into this topic of accelerated learning and intentional interventions and reimagining interventions, I started thinking about the last 18 months and what all of us, particularly you as educators, have gone through for the past 18 months with your students. And I thought, wow, we have been stretched. We have been stretched and stretched and stretched like rubber bands, almost to the point of breaking. We are resilient. You are resilient. And then I thought, is that really the right word, resilience? Because resilience really means the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, but also the ability of a substance or an object like rubber band to spring back into its original shape. And I thought to myself, that's not what we're really trying to do, right? Coming out of this pandemic, going into this new school year, it's more about reinventing and reimagining how we can be better from the things we've learned from the past. So again, I don't know if resilience is the right word, but I guess toughness and maybe strength and those things are what we're actually talking about. So as we move forward, and as we're thinking about reinventing and reimagining ourselves, primarily what we've been realizing through the pandemic, even though this was occurring outside before the pandemic, is that those students where we've seen achievement and opportunity gaps already, they've long been disproportionately affected, and those students of color, those impacted by poverty, and other vulnerable populations such as English language learners, those receiving special education services. Again, school closures that happened due to COVID has only increased these issues. So when we're looking at the new school year and looking at how are we going to address lost instructional time, we're really here today to talk about accelerated learning from the guidance that we've learned and received from the Department of Education, as well as through TNTP, the New Teacher Project. And as we looked at that information about addressing lost instructional time, what we're really trying to do is figure out how are we going to do that, right? How are we going to do that? And it also brought to mind to me that as I was thinking of an analogy, it used to take about 5 months for people to cross the United States by wagon. And now it takes about a week to make that same trip by car. And it's not because we extended the amount of time that we spent traveling each day. It's because we're more efficient than horse-drawn wagons, right? And so instead of spending time addressing learning loss the way we've done historically, and research tells us time and time again that that doesn't work necessarily, we have to push to accelerate learning and to optimize our teaching and our learning systems. And that can be done through accelerated learning, right? The goal here is to keep students moving forward on their intended grade level trajectories by really preparing them to have success in their current grade level content. really opportunities to accelerate by leaning and heavily on robust tier 1 instruction. That includes those grade level assignments, strong scaffolding supports that are just in time, really intentional interventions, deep engagement for our students, and of course, high expectations. And research tells us that it works. So this is from TNTP, and it says those students who received more frequent access to grade level content, they're the ones who made significantly larger gains. So if you see here, students in general, so all students in this sample, they made 1.7 months of growth when they had access to better grade level content, better assignments. But those students, the ones that we talked about at the beginning, those that were the vulnerable populations, those are the ones who actually made the most academic progress just by having access to grade level content and staying with, and that stickiness with peers, right? And so really, as we look at accelerated learning versus remediation, the way we've done things in the past, the primary focus of remediation was really mastering the concepts of the past, right? Filling in all those gaps instead of bridging the gap. And acceleration is going to really strategically prepare our students for success in the present, in the now, this week, on this content, rather than concentrating on everything that students had failed to master. Acceleration is going to really ready students for new learning. So acceleration is also going to address past concepts and skills, but always in the context of future learning. And so another thing I wanted to point out is that remediation is not intervention. Just like RTI, response intervention, falls under the MTSS umbrella, intentional interventions fall under the framework of accelerated learning. And so again, you can see here the intervention's always going to be aligned to the core instruction. It's going to support current learning. The goal is to be short-term, accelerate those learning gains, and really design for a small select number of students that are showing difficulties. Another note for you here too is, especially in K2 foundational literacy skills and structured literacy, we know that those students, in order to really be successful in those later grades, they still need that systematic, explicit instruction in those 5 components of reading, and we need to continue to assess and progress monitor them to ensure that they're getting those skills versus just looking at standards. We want to make sure that they're looking and getting the skills they need. So when will accelerated learning take place? And this, the funding that has been received, it's important to know that part of the reason the extra funding is being given is because educators are being tasked with figuring out how to keep all students in their core content, in their core classes, without taking them out. And so the funding that's been given is giving suggestions on ideas of how are we going to accelerate learning. Is it going to be in school, but very strategically planned through tutoring programs? Is it going to be in out of school programs or extended learning opportunities, or maybe even summer learning and enrichment? So again, the funding is being tied back to where it can take place.
Hey, Julie, I think it's really important to note too on that particular slide, the traditional ways that we used to do in school and our tutoring programs and our after school programs, there's even guidance about how those will look differently as well. And they vary by state because now they're being interjected into maybe some House bills might be created. And so it's really great that you were highlighting how this is, or where this is going to take place as well. So I really appreciate you doing that.
No, thank you so much. And so really, the key to accelerating is determining the critical skills and concepts that students are missing, and really providing scaffolds, just-in-time scaffolds, which we'll talk a little bit about more as we go into the webinar, that are going to bridge gaps while teaching the missing skills that students need with precision and with efficiency, right? So how are we going to accomplish these goals? So for today, we're going to focus on high quality assessments. We're going to focus on just-in-time scaffolding. What does that look like? Engaging all learners via SEL and culturally responsive practices, and looking at purposeful professional development that can be job embedded and done multiple ways: hybrid, on-site, in-person, modular based, just in time, those types of things. So Faith, I'm going to actually turn it over to you to just talk briefly about our key piece of assessment.
Yeah, I think what I want to say is that certainly, 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, the Department of Education, there was guidance that had been coming down, to our governors and to the state education boards, that we had to develop standards and assessments that just weren't, these fill-in bubble sheets, right? We had to make sure that we could measure 21st century skills, problem solving, critical thinking. We had to be able to be precise as well and really pinpoint. And so, I'm just really glad that we're focusing on this high quality assessment piece. It's actually, it's why I'm standing where I am today with iStation. This is just a random personal story. I remember working in this space as a consultant in the intervention space and having districts always saying, what can we do with the assessments? Is there any technology that's being developed that's reliable and valid? And I just was so fortunate to be able to get to know the work that was being done. I was losing the will to live every time an administrator called and just said, hey, we really need to start to be thinking about engaging our kids more in this process. What does that look like? And iStation was a big draw for me. And I'm looking forward to talking a little bit in greater detail about, using assessments for accelerated learning.
Sorry, I was muted. And to your point, Faith, we talked about really understanding where students are in their learning progression, and it's crucial to have a high quality assessment when addressing the amplified unfinished learning that students have experienced during the pandemic. And the goal really is to give razor sharp insight to create an action plan. So really, getting a grasp of the current situation, knowing how we're going to improve it, what resources are we going to use, and then kind of going through that cycle of the goal of improved outcomes for students. And the role of assessment, according back to TNTP in conjunction with the Department of Education, really is, again, in acceleration, we should be looking at just-in-time information and specific approaches based on the content area that we're teaching that's relevant to the grade level. Mm-hmm. And so that goes to, to speak again back to high quality assessments.
Yeah, and I think speaking, when I think about the highlights that you included there that we've been emphasized, another piece of that is about also assessment that has to be embedded within the curriculum, right? And how that's going to continue to serve its purpose. And so, many of the frameworks that our district that we're currently working with our partners, many of you have already put into place, right? You've created your accelerated learning plans. You've probably done your district assessment already, an assessment of how you're addressing accelerated learning. And so we know that it starts with prioritizing data. And we've said this all the time. I think, I sound like a broken record. We always say the right data in the right format, used the right way, empowers everyone, all stakeholders. And we're diligent about making sure that the students and parents are included in this process. And so that's going to be really critical. And you're going to see that sprinkled throughout the pages of the guidance. And in order to take action, right, we've been really fortunate that you have to have that information to make those decisions and take action. And that leads to student achievement, even during a pandemic, which we were fortunate enough last year to work with millions of students. And for our partners that are on the call today, thank you. It was regardless of that learning environment, you were at home, maybe you were in school. We had kids that were doing their assessments in cars as we were working out equitable access within those school systems. So it was really important, but the guidance starts with high quality assessments in order to get that data. And we know that we not only are we saying, look, we need to diagnose, we need to universally screen, but it calls for formative assessments. And we know that there are many ways that teachers are gathering data in the classroom. You see it all the time. It's a constant influx of information as they're in their classroom in front of their students, right? It's from their daily tests, it's from their observational data, they're doing their little reading and writing conferences, but the formative assessment process is one of the strongest tools to support and accelerate learning and growth, and it must be used. And so we talk about prioritizing standards, and it's going to be great. Julie's going to actually show us a way that districts are doing that within the system here. But prioritizing standards and skills, we still need to know that zone of proximal development of each of our learners. So we have to prioritize those reading, math, and in our instance, we also have Spanish literacy in our case, and we have to be able to prioritize down to those priority skills. For instance, in this reading example that's up here, we're fortunate to know that the system goes beyond being validated. We work with partners like John Hopkins. We've got out of Florida, UCF, Metametrics, not only validating and making it reliable, but visually being able to quickly put it in front of you and then helping you prioritize and with images like this. So I think it's really critical also to state that we don't need the researchers to tell us, even though it's mentioned a lot in a lot of the reading materials that you'll get. And from the handbooks and the guidance from the DOE, we don't need the researchers to tell us that students have been disengaged from schooling, even though they've done a ton of research on it. We actually have done our own studies with the data that we're fortunate to have access to. We can all say that we face this over the course of the year, dealing with our disengaged students, our disengaged staff. Even in our personal lives, at full transparency, I have a nephew who missed 52 days of school from March of 2020 through December of 2020, right? And I was, and it's hard. It was really, we struggled with that. And so we honestly can feel with you, and we've been working with districts who have been working on thinking, we're starting off this fresh year. What are we going to do? How can we do this? And Julie, that speaks to using a high quality assessment, not only to prioritize grade level content, but addressing those learning disruptions by engaging students. And you need to be able to begin with that grade level instruction and assess as you go along. I like this screen for a reason. They tell us to, right? Assessment's critical, and we have to do our benchmarks, and we have to be doing our formative assessments, and the ease of being able to making sure that your high quality assessments are automated in a way that also, what I love about this particular screen is we know that the greatest gift you can give a teacher is more time within the time that they're allotted to do the work that they have to do, not more time or more hours and making them stretch their 8, 10, 12-hour days to 14. But give them more time so that that's more effective. And I want to give props, like I love this, our developers, they've worked with our state and our district partners to put these tools in place. This example of our reading assessment, front and center, everything the teacher and the student needs to get through a high quality reading assessment starts here, where you can also see, ISIP is our acronym for our iStations Indicators of Progress, so that's just our assessment. However, oral reading fluency, RAN, being able to measure the processing speeds and being able to do that. And so that's really critical to have that at your fingertips. I would say that it's also important thinking about what we've been through. We have more users of our program circling back to the modeling, because it's important to be explicit about the purpose for the assessment, the clarity and the purpose, and sharing that with the students, and how that data is going to be used, being able to share that information even at the assessment level. So the effective modeling helps the students. It's going to give them a chance to get to know that interworkings of the assessment. They're coming back from varied schooling environments last year. As I mentioned, they were at home, they were on the couch, they were tucked away in the room. They were in school, not in school sometimes, they were or not, had that teacher in their labs. It just varied so much. But whether or not they're in those classrooms, masked up or at home or both, the modeling, when they get in this opportunity to know that it's not going to affect their scores and help them get prepared, is really shows effectiveness in moving forward in that assessment. I would say too, it's important to think about one of the highest priorities that's coming out of the legislation and the handbooks is creating a safe and healthy learning environment and meeting the social and emotional and mental health needs of your students. And right here, I'm just simply showcasing, I'm sorry that I don't have this live for you. This is an amazing, I just have a copy of my prototype here, but this is a screen that before the assessment starts, then the student logs in, this is going to breathe in and breathe out. With the student. We're going to take a few deep breaths in and a few deep breaths out. And this is just a few ways and efforts that are being made to expand our own personal social and emotional maturity, ways that we're helping the districts with that as well. Thanks for letting me highlight that, Julie. I really appreciate it.
No
and then
problem.
I do appreciate that. You know, that's been one of, the effort that we're making as a company into being mindful of the ways that we can help teachers make it ongoing, right? Instead of carving out that time and have them seamlessly being interjected is really critical. But we certainly want to talk about strengthening our partnerships with the students. I talked about doing that modeling, but it also, you know, they have to determine how they like to know how was the information going to be used with me? You know, that's at the heart of the assessment. And so the students are coming in, they need to see that they're making progress. And I'm not getting into this because this isn't really a demo, but systems that are high quality, that are going to show the progress that the students are making. And as it even compares against the goals that are being set, that teachers are working with the students to be setting accordingly as they identify their priority standards and their priority skills. And so certainly this is a much deeper conversation, but I wanted to make sure that you're aware that high quality would include making sure students are starting to own their learning, and it starts with the assessments, and certainly making it fun and engaging is going to be critical.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, Faith, I was going to say that one of the things, as I was reading through the handbooks on accelerated learning, one of the goals was, by putting kids in front of grade level content, that was crucial for them owning their learning, but also being included alongside their on-track peers, right? Because we know that if a student has always received below grade level instruction all day, every day, they're going to end up at the end of the year below grade level, of course, right? The learning acceleration, it does lend more to equity, because it really allows for students to get and then stay caught up. And this is a crucial part by owning their learning. There's a lot of research, even pre-pandemic, that went on that talked about how just by students setting goals for themselves, working with their teachers, understanding what they're learning about, that they could increase, 32, 34 percentile points in one school year just by doing that. So again, that's a huge part of this accelerated learning framework.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you reminding myself and those of us on the webinar of that information. You know me, I'm the storyteller, and I can even remember myself personally. We grew up in an area that was economically disadvantaged, and we had the fortune of being able to move into a neighborhood that had better performing schools. And I can tell you, I remember personally remembering what that felt like, to feel that difference of not being included in the core content the entire time and being shuffled off into a different space and time, and just that disconnect. And so it's nice to know that accelerated learning is going to encourage and to be able to do that is keeping the group together, right? And then peeling off and carving out that time like you identified earlier, and about those 4 different ways that we could do that. So thanks. And certainly I have to, the only reason why I'm really highlighting this is when we talk about prioritizing instructional time and high quality assessments have evolved. We know, as I mentioned, that the time is the teacher's most valuable resource. And so that's the promise of something like an oral reading fluency that the students can do. We worked with districts last year that could not get kids into the classrooms virtually. And one of their goals was just to say, gosh, if we could just, when we get them, we're going to do oral reading fluency. That was going to be a really big opportunity for them. And so it's fun to know that kids are going to actually get invited into a recording studio and they get to play this role of an actor. And then one of the sound engineers guides them through this, experience. And again, it's going to be great it's good for teachers when we think about how can we put and prioritize instructional time back in, and it's through seeing the advancements that are being made with tools like that. But of course, we have to make sure that the data that's coming out is not only pinpointing and prioritizing skills, it has to occur, as we mentioned earlier, while they're working in that interactive curriculum, what data is being provided, what will teachers know is occurring within that curriculum. We need to continue to identify the root cause that's behind the why when we're looking at those student summary charts, right? If they're not meeting their math or reading literacy benchmarks, this detail is going to help a lot of that why. Why are they still having these literacy challenges? And it's down to the pinpointing detail that you can see here. And then, you talked about those 4, approaches, in school, after school, those strong tutorial programs, the summer programs that some of us just actually wrapped up. The formative assessments are going to be crucial in helping guiding not only instruction, but also tracking and monitoring the effectiveness of those appropriate programs as well that you put into place. That's going to be super critical. And, Julie, it's interesting. I love this image because I think this is really a tie-in. You and I have always talked about, we work with districts that choose to, no, it's okay. We work with districts that choose to use that 5-level tier model that you can see here. It helped them not only inform their intervention and instruction decisions, but those core instructional decisions as well. And so this is certainly a way that we're supporting, you mentioned it earlier, are the MTSS frameworks as well.
Absolutely. And, again, the goal here is to understand the data that will be given to you, right? Because we know that with the acceleration framework, the goal is to have students exposed to grade level content at all times. But we know in reality, our students at level 1, tier 3, or level 2, tier 2, those kids may not necessarily be ready to 100% digest the content, but that's the information. Again, when we know where students are in their learning progression, and that leads me kind of to the next point, which is that just-in-time scaffolding. That is so important because we know that scaffolds allow students to move forward with their grade level content while bridging the gap of unfinished learning, right? In the past, we've done a lot. I was guilty of this in the classroom myself, where I did just in case scaffolding, right? I was like, oh, this looks like it might be a very difficult or challenging skill or concept, so I'm going to go ahead and provide scaffolds to all my students, and that was wasted time. That was, some of those kids didn't need it. And the goal of scaffolds really is to build in those supports just when they need it, and then be able to take them away and let students independently soar on their own. So how can we, there's multiple ways to provide just-in-time scaffolding. And I just wanted to give you some examples here today of the ones that are listed. So prioritizing standards, activating and building background knowledge, vocabulary development, different adaptations and modifications to the content that you're teaching, using graphic organizers, and then really utilizing the resources that you have available in front of you already. So one is prioritizing standards. So not all standards are created equal, but sometimes they're all given equal instructional time. So in our current situation, a lot of teachers are going to have less instructional time, right? As a result of the school closures that may occur, or virtual might go back into place. But really, it's more important now than ever to make that conscious decision about how much time and attention will be devoted to specific standards. So there's an article on the Common Core standards by a researcher named Larry Ainsworth. And he really recommended evaluating standards against a list of criteria that you see here, these questions that you should be asking yourself. I will say we're currently working with various partner districts across the US right now. One of them I just met with this week, that they've shared their acceleration framework, and we're going to build professional development around their prioritized standards to ensure that we can help support them with the resources that they're using through iStation. So again, these are questions that you want to ask yourself as you're prioritizing your standards for that just-in-time scaffolding. This is an example. I'm just going to show you an example. So this is a Common Core ELA standard from 4th grade. And it is for reading literature, and it's drawing inferences from text. So what I did is I took a typical 4th grade novel or chapter book, which is one of my favorites. Anything Roald Dahl is a favorite of mine, George's Marvelous Medicine. And I was able to go in and take resources that we currently have. A lot of people think of iStation just as a computer program, but we actually are a blended learning solution that we have a ton of digital resources for educators. We have a ton of downloadable print resources. And this is an example of where, again, we know that students learn faster and they comprehend at a higher level when they have prior knowledge of any given concept, right? So the correlation, I found this interesting, that the correlation between academic background knowledge and achievement is staggering. So just prior knowledge can determine whether a 50th percentile student sinks to the 25th percentile or rises to the 75th percentile. And that's research conducted by Marzano. So, so again, having something like a scenario to help activate or build background knowledge when you're exposing students to text is going to be important. Another key and another piece that's closely related to prior knowledge of the acceleration model, that's a crucial piece, really is vocabulary development. So gaps in prior knowledge are largely related to vocabulary. And so a key step in the acceleration approach is to introduce new vocabulary before the lesson begins in the core class. So you can see here, I took an excerpt out of the book, and I just went through and I found words that I believed were, your tier 2 or your tier 3 words. And I was able to find different resources within our resources at iStation that could be used for vocabulary development activities. I was able to go in also and look at different adaptations to lessons that we had and different modifications with our resources for inferring from text. And you can see here, there's inference charades, 20 questions, there's modifications for English language learners. There's that piece of increasing student engagement, which is really critical in that acceleration approach. And another piece here would be, additional ESL or ELL modifications using picture cards or read alouds or echo reads, partner activities. And then graphic organizers. We really know that graphic organizers are extremely helpful learning tools for students of all ages to organize and clarify or just simplify complex information. So this allows them to construct understanding through the exploration between concepts. So it's a great and useful scaffold to support student learning. And then I had mentioned really utilizing resources that you currently have in multiple ways. So this was just a little bookmark that I created myself for inferring, and using clues to think, judge, and speculate, things that students should be thinking about. The little character you see, his name's Detective Dan. He actually comes, he's a character from our program, and because they're going to be using clues to think and judge, I thought he would be a great little character to use. So again, just taking resources that you currently have and utilizing them in multiple ways. Another thing, we have digital resources for teachers that we can help them go in and look and find resources on those priority standards to help build background knowledge, to have vocabulary activities for small group, for whole group, for different partner activities. We also have the ability to allow educators to make assignments for students. They can do it by finding standards. So we know that making inferences, that reading literature 4.1 standard is important. It was a priority. And so we could go in and find to see if there's an assignment that we could do digitally for our students that they can log in and actually work through those assignments. And so again, it's just utilizing what you currently have to support those just-in-time scaffolds, and also for intentional interventions. Because again, just because we're exposing and keeping kids on grade level content doesn't mean that they're not going to need intervention support, correct? And so that kind of leads Faith to the last, but definitely not the least important piece, is that social emotional learning and culturally responsive practice.
Thank you. Yeah. Hey, Julie, before I do that, I want to thank you and just share that I'm super grateful that you dug a little deeper. I know we've talked about how we're supporting all students in the classroom, not just in the intervention models. I'm super impressed with the way that you helped me realize those additional resources come into play. So thank you for doing that. I'm really super grateful for that. That was a nice deep dive. I want to say that the social and emotional learning piece of it, we just continue to, as I mentioned earlier, you saw earlier in the assessment how we're doing that. You can see on the next slide, Julie, that there are examples of ways that we know that you're in it and you're doing lessons. But within our lessons, you can even see here, we're being mindful about our characters. They have to be diverse. We have initiatives across the company that don't only include just certain individuals, but whole divisions. Every department has a hand in playing on what does that look like. And so not only is it thoughtful about our character development, but if you go to the next slide, Julie, too, we're also thinking about accommodations. We're thinking about even the colors that are being used, the themes and the culturally relevant backgrounds or scenarios and stories that you're seeing played out here. And you can see how we're meeting those needs and constantly expanding, because we know that that's happening all the time. We showed, I showed to Julie's points about those teacher resources. Even lessons that would tap into, homographs, but the center topic is on bullying. We understand that it's going to be really critical and important for us to be embedding those themes into the system, and you'll see that sprinkled throughout in your systems. And I would say to you, if you're dealing with your board of directors, they're going to ask you this. They're going to ask you specifically, when you are working with vendors outside of the work that you're doing, how are the systems and the programs you are utilizing, how are they helping engage all of the learners these ways? This is going to be really critical for you to highlight. And so we're grateful just to be able to touch on these points as the way they're interjected.
Definitely. And just on that point too is, I would urge you, if you haven't already, to really look to the guidance of of different national organizations like the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, which is a leading researcher on SEL, to gather information and address, to address the needs of both students and adults, because part of us as adults is also, going through what we've gone through. We need to have empathy for our students, but also for our peers. There is another piece, which is the Center for Culturally Responsive Teaching and Learning, which really stresses the opportunity to validate and affirm our students' cultures and experiences and our different instructional approaches that we use with them. So if you haven't done so already, those are two organizations that are really worthwhile looking into.
And I think it's important when you're leaving your professional development sessions, I want to, it goes back to something that you said in your scaffolding opportunity there, Julie, when you were focusing in on the vocabulary. When we're working specifically, or when you're working and providing that professional development, we saw when we get down to those instructional coaches, if you have them in your districts or you may not, and you're working with your teachers, and we're in those sessions, and it's not about the how, it's about the what's next after we get that important data. And we're really fortunate to work with a customer success team that has been changing the way that the educators come into professional development sessions, and not only making it applicable, but looking at the scaffolding opportunity that Julie just did. But even prior to that, we worked with districts. I'm thinking, Julie, it's another session, right, for the data and the psychometrician geeks that love the data that we would be able to put together. But when we focused with districts on professional development, and they had identified that vocabulary was going to be layered throughout the areas that they would focus on, not only in their core areas, they had a new core program, but also in that supplemental space as well. And we dug down into that data. We saw tremendous gains. Also, we saw correlations that were spot on. Right, that's that geeky, nerdy stuff. That again is another session we should probably host. But we just want to make sure that the PD that you're receiving is not just about how to use a program. It's the why you're using the program, and it's the what next that the teams really that you're working with must do well.
Absolutely. We know that teachers are the most important factor in a student's achievement. So as we kind of close out this session today about accelerated learning and talking about how we can use that as we move forward into this new school year, I thought about it. It's not just the smart thing to do for our students, it's really the most equitable thing to do for our students. And I hope that you've seen today how accurate data that we've gathered through assessments, efficient and precise instruction with a focus on grade level, but with those just-in-time scaffolds and a safe environment, really, and professional development are key to moving forward, and not just bouncing back, but really truly moving forward. It sounds like a lot of work, and it is a lot of work, but I will say, back to that resilience conversation from the beginning, if nothing else, I do believe that this pandemic has shown the world how much educators can rise to challenges. I mean, you all did it when we went remote, right? Everything was virtual, trying to do video conferencing, trying to do remote assessments, all those things. And I really firmly believe that if we equip you as educators with the right tools and the strategies and the supports that you need, that students will also rise to that occasion. So we so much appreciate your time, and we wish you so much luck moving forward. And we want to ask you if you want to join us again, not necessarily Faith and I, but there's going to be a biliteracy virtual conference that's being hosted in September. I think Katie in the background, one of our folks, is going to add the link there if you wanted to register for that. And then also, you just want to know how iStation can help you through the accelerated approach or otherwise, then please feel free to click on that link, and we put you in touch with the right person that can help guide you and make recommendations on what we can do moving forward. So we, again,
Hey, Julie.
Yes.
Hey, I'm sorry, I'm in the background, but someone asked you to repeat the name of the organization you mentioned to follow the collaborative.
Yes, there's
What?
two. There's
Sorry.
there's the for social emotional learning. It's called the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. It's a national organization. Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And then the other one, which was more about talking about culturally responsive practices. It's called the Center for Culturally Responsive Teaching and Learning.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're so welcome. And we will stick around for questions, but at this point, I believe we will stop recording. If you did sign up for this well, if you're here, obviously you signed up. So you will get a recording of this webinar.